Welcome. We're going to get everybody started here in just a few minutes and let everybody into the meeting, so bear with us. We're glad you're here. Thank you for being here. If you have any questions throughout today's program, please put them in the chat. We're in a webinar format right now, and so we will be answering questions later in the program, but we have some really good discussions happening, as well as some amazing guests that we have on our experience today. So we're so excited you're here. Jackie, or shall we keep going? Or
I think we're ready.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel Riggs, your 2020 chapter president. Thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited to be here with you today for our Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Task Force next installation in their programming. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Morgan Pruitt and Ali Shebeck, who are going to be there with you today to guide you through this program. So over to you, ladies, and thank you so much for all you're doing for the chapter.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much, Rachel, for facilitating this for all of us. Good afternoon. We hope you all had a chance to see our teaser last week. We look forward to today and everything that it holds. Without further ado, we will jump right in. Go ahead, Ali.
All right. Yes, thanks everyone for joining us. And we want to just dive right in with our first panel. This is going to be a fireside chat with some industry leaders who have had great experiences and have great insights with questions coming from the millennial perspective. So to start it all off, we're just going to begin by introducing all of our panelists, allowing them to tell you who they are, what they do, and a little bit about their journey of how they got to where they are today. So David?
Well, again, I'm probably closest to the PCMA family, so I have that typical, boring tourism bureau history path, starting in Miami and then in Canada and Toronto. And by the way, living and working for 8 years in Toronto, one of the most culturally diverse cities in the world, and not living in the United States really was very enlightening for me in terms of my lens. As we as Americans look at ourselves, as we as destinations present ourselves and our industry, it was a very enlightening experience being those 8 years in Toronto. And again, I'm thrilled and blessed and honored to have a chance to be part of our team here at Choose Chicago. We have an outstanding board, and no better example of that than Nakia Wright, the CEO of the Sun-Times. And I'm thrilled, Nakia, that you agreed to join me along with Michelle and Randall. So Nakia, why don't I throw it to you?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Good afternoon. Thank you so much, David, for that introduction. I am Nakia Wright. I'm the CEO of the Chicago Sun-Times here in Chicago, in the newspaper industry, an industry under siege that we are working to save so that we can continue to educate the electorate. So it's a very important role and task that we have here in Chicago. Super thrilled to talk to you all about sort of the city of Chicago, what that means in terms of a brand that is sort of amplifying the voice of the voiceless. So I'm a business major by background. I had no experience at all in the newspaper industry. And so I only highlight that just to say that when you're thinking about a career, you don't always have to go in a very linear fashion. You can fall into something that can be one of the most rewarding things or aspects of your career. I'll turn it back over to you all.
And no stranger to this family is Michelle Mason, of course. And again, another proud member of the Choose Chicago Board of Directors. Michelle, thank you for agreeing. And again, you're no stranger to this family, but welcome and thank you for being part of this.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you, PCMA Midwest chapter, for having me. I'm Michelle Mason, President and CEO of Association Forum. No stranger to PCMA. We have a strong partnership. Association Forum is the association for associations in the Chicagoland area, representing over 1,700 associations and the second largest community next to Washington, D.C. My path is I've always been an association well, not an executive, but worked in associations and have grown my career over the years, having having started in Washington, D.C. at ASAE, and then over the past several years now in Chicago. So thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
And then lastly, of course, we all know that the hotel industry is a big, big part of all that we do. And I'm delighted that one of our newest, dare I say, hippest hotels, 21C, has just opened here in Chicago, an amazing property if you haven't seen it, and led by an amazing colleague, Randall Williams. Randall, thank you for joining me as the GM of this amazing new hotel.
Thank you, David, and it's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon to everybody. As David stated, I'm the general manager of 21C Museum Hotel Chicago, and journey-wise, not dissimilar from all of us who have our own stories. It's about giving a voice to the people, whether it's the artists that are here in the museums or the lives that we touch every day. It's no stranger to the people that know me, but that going up through the industry, for me, it was more of a give back. Because of what was given to me and the opportunities. I was actually adopted. And so it was the people in my life that gave me an opportunity. And so the ladies and gentlemen that I serve is somebody's mother, father, daughter, son, and deserve to be treated with the same amount of respect and care. So regardless of title, I kind of see that as my journey of giving back to the people that deserve an opportunity. And thank you for having me.
Holly Morgan, I'll turn it back over to you.
David. And to all of you, again, thank you so much for joining us. So the title for today's panel is Millennials in the Movement. We wanted to make sure that we highlighted two different areas of this. One, talking with our industry leaders, or our industry powerhouse leaders, I should say, and getting their input on what needs to be done in the industry, as well as the second part of highlighting the millennials that are on the ground making the change. So without further ado, again, my name is Morgan Pruitt, and my counterpart, Ali Shebeck. We will be interviewing or moderating this panel for today. And Ali, I will pass it to you for our first question.
All right. Okay. So our first question is going to be for Michelle, Randall, and Nakia. Over the past couple of decades, I'm sure the workforce, the industry at large has changed a lot, and technology has changed how we interact and how we even go to work, especially today. So Michelle and Nakia, as Black women, and Randall as a Black man, what do you think has changed in the workforce, and what still needs to change in order to push us forward?
I think that question starts with you, Michelle. Great. Well, thank you for an excellent question. I think what, at least speaking from my organizational experience, what's currently happening in the workforce is that there's a greater level of accountability, particularly as we look to respond to some of the racial inequities that are out there. When I look at the voice of the millennial, I think that, you know, my lens is that the baby boomers really focused on diversity as well as Gen X, but I think the millennials are really looking for inclusion and accountability. And we experienced that over the summertime, right? With a peaceful protest. And what they're doing is bringing that into the workforce. And that's being perpetuated through technology. And so my experience has been providing a place and a space for those voices to be heard, because once I know and have as a leader in my organization, a clear understanding of what they are looking for from a future in my organization, I'm better able to prepare the business strategies. You know, I'm very excited about it. Recently, Association Forum conducted research that was released in July on welcoming the environment, which is our approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we learned from that research is there's a very clear understanding of diversity, which is representation. The inclusion piece is an opportunity, particularly in associations where we need to grow, develop, and have more success. And that really focuses on allowing the millennials and Gen Z to bring their unique selves and unique voices to the workforce, and leveraging that as an opportunity for creativity and innovation to grow the association community.
I love that, absolutely. When people feel that their voices can be heard and that their voices are being treated with the same amount of respect, I think that's when we have the best ideas. Randall, let's kick it over to you.
You know, I believe that success belongs to the discontent. And I believe that there is always going to be a pursuit that will never get there. I think there has been obviously progression. I think what has changed, even from when I was starting in my career, much of the action is actually being executed. Granted, there are still opportunities, but I think that that will continue, especially now with a heightened sense of awareness, emotional intelligence. I most recently heard today, cultural awareness. I think that that will tie into the progress that will follow. But I think, and as a matter of fact, I know with a heightened sense of awareness that is going on right now, that there will be more of a push for leadership reflective of the people that they serve. In larger proportions and in many business cases for it, but more importantly, just the right thing to do. And I think in part with all of the actions with everyone and the passions and the steps that will be taken, I think that journey will continue.
Absolutely, yes. Representation and leadership is going to be huge and is huge right now. So let's finish this question off with Nakia.
Right. So I appreciate the bookends that you gave, which was the last 2 decades. And so next year I will be celebrating my 20-year anniversary from undergraduate. So certainly when I entered the workforce as it relates to your timeline, I do have a set of observations. The first thing I think that is important is the path to leadership has completely changed. So it used to be all about seniority. Now it's all about experience. And experience is really how do you use your minutes. One person can do a ton of things in 1 year, have a ton of experiences, which completely accelerates them versus someone who's sort of had the same sort of similar, not dissimilar experience. And so it's how do you use your minutes? So the path to leadership has completely changed. And so that should be very encouraging for people. It's no longer about age. It's about what have you done with your minutes to be able to bring that exposure to bear. The other piece is we focused a lot on getting in the door. But now it's time to pivot to what happens after you get in, right? And so Michelle and Randall talked about this. It's inclusion, we can define that, but how are you ensuring that your purpose for bringing that person in actually comes to bear and that you have an experience for them to bring his or her best self to work? And then the third piece is communication. And so that's that inclusion in those decisions. It's easy to go and ask someone for their opinion, but as an organization, are you ready to take that feedback? And are you ready to articulate the why? It used to be almost our parents' generation would say, do this because I told you so. People are not interested in that anymore. They want to understand how that fully impacts the business and why they are particularly doing something. And so those 3 things I think are the biggest change.
Thank you all for that insight. Our attendees, they really did kind of hone in on what we really need and what's important today. Our next question is actually going to be for David Whitaker. David, understanding how involved millennials and Gen Z have been with the Black Lives Matter movement, how do you think millennials can shape the hospitality industry moving forward? I think you may be on mute, David.
I apologize. You know, we practice and practice and practice, never get it right. We should have somebody invents a handheld mute button. They're going to make a fortune. Just want you to know. But thanks for the question. You know, I am by far not an expert or even a self-defined expert on millennials, right? And I struggle as a manager or as a colleague in the workplace trying to put labels on these things. And so, in fact, the word label is very intentional. I don't necessarily know how millennials like to be defined. The fact that there is a definition that is a difference between generations, I struggle with. You know, in my time starting in the workplace, we did everything we could not to have labels. And that's a big discussion right now when you talk about bias, when you talk about things that are still discriminatory, or you think about barriers or glass ceilings. And millennials are coming into the workforce, not just this year, but in the last several years, but with this incredible moment where they have a chance to redefine what some of these labels are. And so that's really, I guess, if the millennials were a client, just a hypothetical, right? If millennials called Choose Chicago and said, hey, we want you to represent us, you know, I would walk through that natural steps of mission, goals, strategies, brand, desired outcomes, measurable metrics. And again, maybe we should go through that exercise as we talk about addressing some of the things that we're focusing on right now. And again, I congratulate PCMA for having this committee and this work group. We've started a work group at Choose Chicago that I hope can be a resource for us and for the industry, because we need to start perhaps defining these things and build consensus so that we can have a unified, consistent, measurable, accountable path forward.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. Definitely having the measurable and accountable path is very important, especially for millennials, as we are on the ground making the change, trying to figure out how we can benefit and give forth to the hospitality industry. I'll pass it over to Allie for our next question.
All right, so Randall, this next question is for you. Leading a hotel enterprise certainly has its challenges, and we'd imagine, especially for a person of color. Is there anything that stands out to you that's been the hardest, most challenging part of your that might be following in your footsteps?
So I would definitely say that it's not the technical aspect of my job. You know, that those are the things that can be taught. We hear that time and time and again. The lesson that I have learned, and it took me some time to learn it, was to be true to myself. But that's in part because I didn't really know who I was. And so surrounded by so many leaders, you know, you in part think that imitation is what's going to get you to where you're at, but it's really more of an internal journey. And so you cannot be the best to other people if you're not the best version of yourself. And so much of the advice that I would give would be in kind of inclined to that. And then the other piece would be understand your role and inspiration in helping other people, and understand the purpose of what that is. If you ask me what my average daily rate was of a hotel I was 2-3 years ago, I couldn't tell you. But I could tell you about the interaction that I had with a colleague, how it made me feel, how it made them feel. You know, those are the things that stay for a lifetime. So my piece of advice of a person of color is, one, understand that you are an inspiration to people that you have met and to many people that you may never meet. But the opportunities that you have pave the way for other opportunities, and be true to yourself.
That was great advice, Randall. Definitely being true to yourself and knowing that people like yourself have paved the way for people in the hospitality industry, like myself, and moving forward. So thank you. Thank you for sharing. Our next question is to everyone. With workplace diversity being a major topic within corporate America, what initiatives are you putting in place to make your company more diverse? David, we'll start with you.
There we go. I want to make sure I was unmuted. You know, I think, again, we talked about accountability and we talked about measurement. So there are some obvious statistical things. You know, I am generally proud of our diversity in our staff. We have some work to do in terms of senior staff, though. And that's often, you know, it's not just one layer, it's a layer upon layer. I'm also incredibly proud of our board. I would encourage anyone to look at choosechicago.com at our website. Nakia and Michelle, great examples of that. Glenn Eden, our chair. And that was intentional. I don't think that diversity existed 5 years ago when I first got here. And I'm quite proud of the importance our organization has made on diverse board leadership, because in all of our associations and corporations, it's not just the staff, it's the board, and both are very, very important. So those are some statistical things, right? I mentioned earlier that we created a working group. And in fact, I want to take a moment, Tamara Jones, who's part of your family and part of your inner workings on this committee, she's been a great inspiration for me. And I know the hours that she's put in this. Anthony Molino, also another member of my team, our team that has been very active. And then Roz Stutley. In fact, Roz has been appointed our chair, self-appointed, peer appointed, and she's chairing an internal working group at Choose Chicago that I want to come to our table with ideas, recommendations. I don't know how many organizations have created internal teams. There's not a more important time perhaps to do that. But the key will be, what will these teams come back with recommendations? And I, being held accountable, how can we make sure that we put some of those recommendations in place?
Thank you, David. And we'll pass it over to Michelle.
Great. When I started Association Forum in 2014, the board said to me, Michelle, we know we've done a great job with diversity. We need to evolve our thinking. And so in 2015, Association Forum coined the term, trademarked the term welcoming environment, because we really wanted to, when we think about an association, we know that an association is a group of people joined together for a common purpose. And that really gets to the heart of inclusion. And Randall said it well, you know, people might not remember what you say, but how you make them feel. Maya Angelou, she really spoke to that. And so the core value of Association Forum is really centered around inclusion and within that diversity. And so that has been our guiding principle for the past several years. I'm very fortunate that my entire management team is female, and I only have one male, Randall and David on my team. But I really focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we can't live that core value unless we demonstrate it in everything we do. So our initiatives center around the images that we project to our members, the intentionality that we have around our conferences, the leadership that we have on our board. But it goes beyond that. It really focuses on also the training that we have within our governance structure. What are the questions that we want our incoming leaders to ask, and what do we want them to represent? And it also really focuses on the broad spectrum of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not just the traditional characteristics, it's a different ideologies, right? There's geographic, there's all sorts of focus areas. And so that leads us to training. But most importantly, we had a rough summer. We had a very rough summer, and we had tough conversations. And so what we support, in addition to research and education, we support having conversations within the membership on racism as a public health issues, conversations around words matter, the racial orientation of words, because it's really about having those tough conversations that are organized by Association Forum that leads to change within our membership. So we have a portfolio of work, and it is an ongoing process. This is definitely a journey.
Definitely, I've written down a few notes that you mentioned, and those were definitely inspiring. So thank you, Michelle, for sharing. Nakia.
So just by way of background, I started out after business school in the consulting industry. Consulting is very much like banking and private equity, where you probably have 1 or 2% of the employees that are minorities. And so I live the double minority life, right? I'm a female and I'm Black. And so when I got the opportunity to be COO and then CEO, what I wanted to do very easily was be the change that I wanted to see. Yes, we can wait on policy for people to make pay equitable, but without the policy, that doesn't mean that I don't have the ability to do exactly that. And so one of the things that I've done is I'm in charge of payroll. I'm a chief. I get to see what people are getting paid. I'm not waiting for someone to create a policy for pay equity. I'm making pay equitable. As a Black woman, we also know that Black women are one of the most highest educated sort of race, gender in this country. Part of that is because we have to be in order to be breadwinners sometimes for our families. And so knowing that I'm not waiting on a policy for someone to show me the data on how men make $1 versus women making 75 cents, I can change that immediately, right? And so it's understanding what you can influence versus what you can actually do. The other things as it relates to diversity, one of the initiatives that I do, and I'm living and breathing this right now, is we've all heard the narrative that you can't find any people of color to do these roles, therefore I haven't hired any. Now, I do not believe that at all. I do, however, believe that it is harder in some cases to find people of color. And so what do? I slow down the hiring process. I slow it down. And a lot of people are not going to do that. They're doing what's in the best interest of the business. But what I'm doing is what is in the best interest of society and intersecting that with what's in the best interest of the business. Because if I don't do it, I cannot even pretend to rely upon my white colleagues to do it. So I have to be that example. And so I'm slowing down the process right now and hiring a controller. I'm telling everyone, if you're giving me candidates, it must be a diverse pool. Now, are we always going to bubble to the top? No, but we need to be able to have that exposure and understand what the competition is like so that we can continue to hone our talents and be the best person. One of the simple things that we don't do, for example, is recognize how important LinkedIn is. We don't have our picture, we don't have the updated information, and so people bypass us. There are very simple things that we can do from the bottom up to ensure that we rise to the top of that talent pool. Not only should people, for example, be looking for work on their own, but if there are headhunters in your industry, you've got to get in front of those headhunters. I'm not talking about executive search. I'm just talking about specific headhunters, because that's one of the places that people sort of look for work. And so we've got to meet each other halfway. From the top, I can mandate, and then the places where I can influence, I need the talent to meet me halfway to make sure that we can get all of that done. And so there, when I am able to use my gavel at work, I'm absolutely going to do that, because I expect other people to do that for us as well.
I'm really speechless, but that was amazing. Definitely wrote down some gems that I look forward to sharing. And I know the comments are buzzing, and I do encourage people at the end to definitely ask questions to our panelists. And finally, Randall.
You know, when I think back, especially over this summer, and how, like many millions of people, I was emotionally touched by George Floyd, and thinking internally that if I didn't have the opportunity to have the people come into my life in hotels, that my life would not be dissimilar. And I think, and I wrote a pretty intelligent, emotional email to the president and CEO of our brand. David knows her, Heather McCrory. And in that, I just felt a need to say something, because I got tired of looking around within the brand and even many of the companies I didn't see people that looked like me. In fact, it wasn't until I saw an African-American GM at the time with another brand that I worked for, I didn't actually believe that it was even possible for me. I didn't believe that it was a reality. And so this week, actually, I was given the responsibility by the president and CEO of Accor. I was named co-chair of our diversity, equity, and inclusive committee. And so I'm thankful, because it puts me in the best position to help other people, and about giving people a voice, having tangible metrics. And so we recently announced that 30% of our management team across the entire brand portfolio will be Black, Indigenous people of color. I can tell you it's not there today. And I think about my role in assisting that in the field, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity. And so my role in helping that, again, to people that I know, people I will never meet, and I think about the future. So I am the son of a Black mother who made the ultimate sacrifice so that way I can have the life that I have. I am the father of a Black daughter, and I think about, our daughter and what is her life going to be like 20 years from now, 25 years from now, and the things that I do, how will that reflect the world that she lives in? And that's honestly what drives me. And so when I think about all of the things that we're all doing in our respective fields and the peoples that we touch, it's just a constant journey. But me specifically within our organization, I've been given the best opportunity by the president of our company to help the company make a difference, because she knows, and many people know, we're not there, especially in the luxury lifestyle segment, but that's going to change.
And Randall, let me just add, congratulations on being appointed that. Accor has a big footprint in Chicago. So anything you can ask of Choose Chicago, don't hesitate to reach out.
Stay close to the phone, David.
You got it. And by the way, Heather McCrory, that was exactly what I would have expected from her. She's an amazing person.
Yeah, very thankful.
Yes, thank you so much, Randall. That was really a really impactful statement. So Michelle, our next question is for you. And you touched on this a little bit, but I'm sure that you can expand on it for us. So after the death of George Floyd, many companies published statements of support and said what they were doing to impact change in the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm sure everybody got all of that barrage of emails back over the summer. But since you are the leader of really the Association for Associations, did you feel a responsibility to your members to kind of lead the charge on this important issue?
Absolutely. Not just from an association forum perspective, but from a Black female perspective. George Floyd could have been my brother. He could have been an uncle. He could have been a friend. There's so many George Floyds in my life. But we also have to realize he wasn't like the first. He was public. We all witnessed that, and it horrified all the globe. And racism in America, hundreds of years, right? What we have to understand is that we have platforms because it is a public dialogue now, and we have to leverage our platforms. And to the point earlier, have those uncomfortable conversations so we can find a sense of unity. That's what we're seeking, if that is at all possible these days. But I definitely felt that it was important to leverage association forums platform to help members have those conversations within their organizations and within their membership, because when we think about fundamentally associations and our civic responsibility, that's who we are, that's what we do. Right? When we think about Black Lives Matter, that's a cry because of the racial injustices and such, and the need for healing in the world. And what better sector to respond to that and bring unity than associations? And there is no one right approach. So in each organization, each leader is, providing or going in a direction with the hope of doing something. And so what I want for us to think about, a statement is a statement. We have to move to action, and we have to continue this dialogue. Let this not be a moment. And so that's what we're really focused on at Association Forum, and we're focused on the tools and the resources to help our members respond. So this is definitely a journey, and we will support our members throughout this journey.
Thank you, Michelle. The next question that we do have is for Nakia. In running a newspaper, you have your finger on the pulse of the city of Chicago. How has the Black Lives Matter movement impacted the city of Chicago?
So thank you for giving my position much more cachet than it deserves. No, so because I'm not a news veteran and I'm more of a business person turning the business around, really the people who have their pulse, their finger on the pulse of the city are the journalists. And I say that in tongue in cheek, saying to diminish my role, but I want to be very clear in what they do. An example that I give people is during the verdict for the Laquan McDonald, my job was to buy the bulletproof vests for journalists who were actually going out in possible harm's way. It was the journalists who were actually understanding that and talking to their sources and really have their boots on the ground. And so I want to make sure that we really, really understand where the praise should go, and that should be to the journalists. That said, leading this organization and making sure that I can underwrite whatever their initiatives are is very, very important. Black Lives Matter for many people is a sort of monolithic type of movement. I think there are very, very many people who are supporting that. If you look at Chicago, one of the most segregated cities in America, I was born and raised in Atlanta. And so Atlanta is sort of a Black Mecca where you go anywhere and you see a Black person. Here in Chicago, you actually have to look for them, even walking downtown pre-COVID. And so what has happened and what I'm very appreciative of is some of the richest people and the most well-connected people in the city and state, it is now on their radar. The Chicago Sun-Times, the largest investor is a gentleman who owns and is responsible for a $55 billion private equity fund. And one of the things that he said, and one of the things that a lot of people are saying that we have to be careful and cognizant of, is there are lots of white people who believe in the movement, but they're also very nervous about being pushed aside. There are some white men that I've had dinner with, of course I won't name them, who have said, you know what, I think this is super important, but I'm not ready to be put out to pasture, right? And so when we have this conversation, not only do we have to recognize what we want and where we've come from, but we also have to recognize that there are a lot of people that look at this in terms of losing something in order for us to gain something. And so that's so, so, so important. And so as we think about how are we going to continue to go forward, it has to be that negotiation where it says a rising tide raises all boats. If you give me a job, that does not necessarily mean that you don't have one, but we can all be in this together. And if Black Lives Matter, I think, is to continue to move and get the momentum, you've got the majority and you can't scare them. You've got to bring them along. And so bringing them along means showing them where they fit, showing them how they can help, but also showing how you can take advantage of the opportunity. And so it's impacted Chicago in a great way, right? And so I believe in I say this all the time, managing your minutes. Now this is top of mind for a lot of people. And so how do we pivot into the what next? As an executive at the Sun-Times, it's my implicit and explicit oath to think about Black employment matters, right? And so while I'm not out there fighting the fight for the lives, the journalists are doing that, the question is, what can I do? And as I am an evangelist for saving journalism, every time I get the platform, I talk to other people about what they can do. But at the end of the day, you know, I hate to sort of couch it in this way, but you can't scare people. You have to bring them along in order for them to continue to fight the fight for you.
And one of the things that I kind of touch upon often in the IDE task force is that we all can have a seat at the table. And that's kind of what you were mentioning at one point. So thank you, everyone, for sharing. Allie?
Yeah, that was very impactful. And what you said, Nakia, reminded me of, I've seen it a lot where talking about pay inequality, and it's not pie. You know, if a Black woman is making 75 cents to my dollar or whatever that is, I'm not going to lose anything if we both make the same, or, you know, she's paid what she deserves. Maybe that's more than what I make. So I think that's really important, especially, you know, for myself as a white woman to remember, and other white people to remember, is that we can create an equitable and inclusive and diverse industry and community without taking things away. So our last question. Yes. Our last question is for everyone. And I know we've already touched on diversity and inclusion policies, but a little bit more specifically, what are all of your organizations doing to support the Black Lives Matter movement, racial justice, and how do you feel that you are setting an example or could be setting an example for other companies in the industry to really follow suit? David, would you like to start?
Sorry, I'm so bad at this. So sorry. You know, it's a great question. And the simple fact that I don't know if I have the right answer is indicative of the situation that I find myself in, and that I think a lot of us find ourselves in, is how do we answer that question, right? You know, I've challenged my colleagues, and I'd love to do this. And by the way, I hope, and again, Rachel, I hope a year from now we can have this same meeting. And I'd love to ask everyone on this call, what could be different a year from now? Literally, write it down. Please share it with each other. Hey, share it with me. Find a way. I'd love just to capture, because I see all the notes coming by, right? If we met a year from now, you know, so Yolanda on the call earlier on the message said it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. The problem with the sprint is you can see the finish line. It's right there. A marathon, you can't see the finish line. What is going to be different a year from now? We should try to capture that and challenge ourselves to play a role in finding that difference and achieving that difference. And I'd love to facilitate and be part of an exercise like that.
I love that. If anyone watching wants to share it in the comments, we'll be sure to save the comments and revisit this a year from now.
Absolutely. My term is ending in December, but I know Molly, who's on the call here too, is listening loud and clear. And I think it's one thing that we can do at GMC to ask the members this: how do you see this different in a year? So let's take that on and know that we will make that happen.
Because that's when accountability starts having teeth.
Molly just responded in the chat, we will. So we're going to do it.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Nakia, would you like to speak next?
Sure. Do you mind repeating the question? I want to make sure that I'm succinct in my response.
Yes. What is your organization doing to support the Black Lives Matter movement, racial justice?
Perfect. So that's a journalist's day to day, right? And so my job is to make sure that we're around and can underwrite that. And so giving a voice to the voiceless is exactly what the news and the media industry should be doing. There's a tension in newspapers, right? What do you chase? Because there's an opportunity cost for every story that I do. There's a story that I'm turning down and not doing. We've got one of the most diverse newsrooms in the country. That's not saying that much, but we still have the accolade, let's be clear. In terms of our readership as well, we're one of the only media companies in the United States that has a very strong proportion of Blacks, whites, and Hispanics. And Latinx. And so given the polarization of the country, that's something that we're proud of and we're trying to continue to amplify in certain ways. It goes back to what I said in the beginning, which is leading by example. The problem that I think we have, and you can look at the Fortune 500 in terms of executives as a perfect example. 10 years go by, oh my gosh, we have a Black person that's the head of a Fortune 500. That person retires. You wait 10 more years for another person to come through, right? And so what I'm trying to do is continue to build a pipeline. And that's what we all need to be able to do, continue to build a pipeline. So talking to people like you all, understanding where we can go and get the talent so that for every minority that leaves, there should be a competitive, not guaranteed, but certainly competitive minority that should be able to take that over. And so leading by example, like I said earlier, slowing down the hiring process so that my pipeline for candidates for any role is diverse.
Absolutely. Thank you. Randall, would you like to go next?
Sure. As an organization, we have specific strategies and tactics supporting Black Lives Matter. A few of those, one of those is we're having conversations about contributions to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And a portion of room revenue over Black History Month across hotel portfolios to help support their mission. We are doing unconscious bias training. So many of our colleagues are just simply unaware because they're unaware. You know, their perspective has been their own, polarized to a view with not much else. So a lot of that is just training. We're looking at education. We've recruitment. We've had many conversations about. Well, everybody's talking about, you know, in our industry about, oh, let's recruit from HBCs and hospitality programs. And that's great. The only thing about that is most of the people in our industry did not go to hospitality schools, you know, and there are other schools within HBCUs and other colleges, the schools of accounting, schools of engineering, business schools, the psychology, the social sciences schools. You know, we have to change, and we will change our network of how we are recruiting talent and people of color in the industry. But to be polarized in a view that you can only be successful if you went to a hospitality program, it's just simply false. And also included in what we're talking about, there's not a Black mother and father that does not know what the talk is. And I can tell you that with our daughter, there is a part of me that was thankful that she was a daughter, because God forbid I would have to have that conversation with my son. You know, there's a part of me that felt that way, if I'm being honest. So part of the awareness that we're doing as a company is reverse mentoring. So that way people have an understanding of not just that aspect, but other aspects. And then what does the talk look like for non-Black parents with their children? So they have a sense of awareness. And these are all of the things that we're doing, having the right conversations, building that foundation, those building blocks towards a better future.
Absolutely. So powerful. What you said about having a daughter and being thankful. And I hate that that's how it is. And, and I know my parents never had to have that sort of conversation with me. So it's very, very moving what you just said. Thank you, Randall. Michelle, would you like to finish us off today?
Sure, thank you. So for us at Association Forum, what we will continue to do is build out or aggressively continue to introduce a conversation around welcoming environment into the association community. At Association Forum, self-reported, we have 1% Latinx, 1% Asian, 4% African American, self-reported demographic information. So we have a huge opportunity to build the pipeline, and we are doing that through a partnership with Choose Chicago. We have an internship program where we're reaching out to underrepresented communities within colleges to introduce them to association management as a career path. We'll continue to engage our members in conversations that are very uncomfortable with the hope or the desire to inspire conversations within their organizations, with their staff and their governance structures. We know that some governance structures need to change, and you change with having dialogue and understanding and finding that commonality. We are at Association Forum, our next fiscal year, if not before, we will start to introduce affinity groups into the organization. So our members will be able to convene around, Latinx will be our first affinity group, but Black affinity group, LGBTQI. So we want our members to always find a sense of place and space in the community because they have a choice to join Association Forum. And we would like them to take that experience out into the world and be ambassadors. And again, we'll continue our research and education around this very important topic. And we will touch on topics that are uncomfortable, topics that we have conversations about in private. We want to bring light to them. So again, being an association for associations where we can bring diverse and inclusive groups together to have these discussions will be very important for us. And we'll continue that with the support of our members.
Thank you. Thank you all for that amazing answer, or those amazing answers that you shared. We are at time, but we want to thank you all so incredibly much for sharing these gems. Between the comments and my phone blowing up, you all have really inspired a ton of people today. My peers, my colleagues, my friends, everyone. And I'm sure Ali can say the same thing. I was literally shaking this entire time, and you all had some amazing gems. I believe there will be a recording of this for everyone to see and share on the PCMA website. But we will now be transitioning to part 2 with our millennials in the movement that are on the ground. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Yes, thank you so much. So now we wanted to flip the conversation, like Morgan said, and speak with millennials who are really on the ground doing the work. So to kick us off, we're going to start sort of the same way and have everyone go around and introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about what you do and why it's so important for you to be involved with the Black Lives Matter movement. So how about we start with Brian?
Hey everybody, good afternoon. My name is Brian Riddick. I'm the principal of Butler College Prep. We're one of the campuses of the Noble Network of charter schools. My campus is far south side at 103rd and Cottage Grove, basically. Very important for me to be involved with the movement because I work with the students every single day. And as a part of preparing them for life after high school, it's important that we certainly navigate through one of the most powerful and instrumental movements of my generation. What I anticipate will certainly be theirs too.
Thank you. Keisha, would you like to go?
Yeah, definitely. Greetings, everyone. Super happy to be a part of this collective today. Definitely even learning a lot from our first session. But I'm Keisha Scott. I oversee special events for the Chicago Cubs and Wrigley Field and some of our surrounding areas, but been in the hospitality industry for about 15 years now. And I will say definitely, when it comes to being involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, me personally, I am a Black woman, and that's something that is something I can't escape, one. So, and also being a Chicago native, and even this year, just with the unrest, I feel like it's something that we all understand and feel. And I really appreciated this climate in making a lot of us just really uncomfortable to have these conversations that need to be had. And even personally, whether that's, you know, within our homes or our interactions with family and friends, but then also from a professional standpoint, I really love the fact that we're not just looking away, even though that we know that these injustices are happening. And so the way a lot of, you know, corporate initiatives and even the way sports has really decided to step up and highlight a lot of issues that we're seeing. And then also implement different collectives to try to now, okay, let's have the conversation. How can we make it better, but then also have accountable change? And so this is definitely something I want to be a part of because it directly affects people that look like me. And so we can only go up from here. And so I'm happy that we're having this discussion and we can continually kind of talk across the board and learn from one another.
We are as well, and we're so glad to have you with us today. Morgan Malone, I should say.
Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan. I am an economic development practitioner, and I am also the current director of development and external affairs for Farpoint Development. It's a commercial real estate firm here in the city. In addition to that, I have an initiative called Resisting in Place, which is an anti-racism initiative showcasing how Black people across America are engaging in anti-racist initiatives in their own respective industries, institutions, and creative expressions. And so I knew out of the gate before Black Lives Matter was in a lot of ways very commodified and very like with this huge national presence. I was always involved in the movement. So it was a natural transition for me to continue to be engaged because it was like balancing two lives, your life of your day-to-day professional where you're going to go to work and folks are either engaged or not engaged. And a lot of people have had no idea what was going on or weren't super tuned in versus like at night giving out food at night or doing actions at night or going, trying to balance what it meant to be in the corporate world and also be an activist on your own time and also balance whatever perception that could bring to your professional or corporate life. So service has always been in me. I've been, in doing community service and campaigns and all the things since I was like 10 years old. So this has always been natural for me, but it has definitely been a teaching moment for all of us. Once the George Floyd uprisings occurred, it was automatic to me. Like, we need to do something about culture because people are thinking that Black Lives Matter is just police and prisons and protest, when the reality is there are deep-seated anti-racist actions to be taken in every industry and institution, and we needed to be thoughtful about what we did about those things and how we shifted culture to shift tangible systems.
I love that. Thank you so much for giving everybody a lot to think about, because I know that a lot of people don't really realize that about the Black Lives Matter movement. So thank you for sharing. So last but not least, Jamal, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for having me. The first panel was great. Nakia is like my long lost auntie that I wish I had. They definitely had some great things to say. I'm Jamal Green. I've been an activist in the city for several years. One of my national to fame moments was the face of the Laquan McDonald movement, a young man that was shot 16 times, and organizing for change each and every day, standing in front of the mayor's house until he gave them body cameras and tasers, and really fighting for different policy changes for the Chicago Police Department. And on the front lines, as you would say, during Rahm Emanuel's tenure. I was a surrogate for Bernie Sanders, so I traveled with him for both election cycles. I ran for mayor of Chicago, the youngest to ever run for mayor of Chicago, and unleashing ideas on how to really make change within a department, within communities, and bring in new ideas on how to transform our city. I was also, one of the leaders, the first 5 days during the George Floyd situation, partnering with the family and out there each and every day getting shot with rubber bullets and tear gassed, and just really being a part of movements that are happening not only in Chicago, but in other cities. But I'm also an entrepreneur. And so I've been an entrepreneur since I was 15 years old, and I own several companies. And so I fight also the economic fight, because that is the only fight, the biggest fight, in my opinion, that can help change Black communities all over the country, is if we start to get folks to open up businesses and bring down capital, if we start to get folks to stop renting and start owning, right? You got the majority, over 75% of Black people in Chicago that are renting, right? Trying to move forward and build generational wealth, which is why my last fight, most recently, which we won, was fighting against Chase Bank and forcing them to give hundreds of millions to the city of Chicago by shutting down over 30 of their branches. So, we have to continue to bring partners from all sectors, because this fight is not a fight that we should be fighting alone. We need everyone and all hands on deck. And a lot of people can be doing more. And since the George Floyd situation, some people have, but most people haven't. And I know there are folks who say, what can I do? Well, they have to want to do something and want to seek out that information. And so that's why I'm happy to be on this panel, and we'll be sharing more ideas soon.
Thank you, Jamal. So without further ado, we're going to jump into our first question. It's to Brian. Brian, as a principal and educator working with Generation Z, what do you feel that what can be done to prepare the next generation to continue the work that's being done now?
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. So as luck would have it, as soon as it's my turn, the housekeeping started vacuuming in the hall. So if you hear that and it's distracting, my apologies. I appreciate thinking about that question. My thoughts like range widely. They sort of start with just general ideas about like the creation and then ultimately the eradication of the Black Panther Party. But then they also like stretch and I think live mostly with awareness about what I would call the struggle. The first thing is I would say we need to prepare like a deck of leaders. That conversation comes up often in my circle of friends. We think about like leadership within my generation, but then it sort of like transcends and we start to think about leadership in the upcoming generation as well. And the second thing I'll mention is like the need for collective buy-in. And I'll talk about that for a second, because I believe that we are raising a generation that is encountering race in ways that we did not. And for that reason, I think sometimes I notice with students, they don't feel as connected to the work that needs to happen. They don't seem as impacted in the work that needs to happen. And as we sort of like prepare this generation to enter the world, we need to make sure they understand what world they're entering. And for that reason, I believe the preparation actually sort of starts there. The second part of my answer to that is in the preparation of students who, or a generation who looks like me, there's also a lot to be done in terms of like allyship, a word that's being like thrown around like frequently now. And I think it's used in a way that's sort of flippant. So people are like, oh, I'm an ally. And like, what makes you an ally? Not only what makes you an ally in front of me, but what makes you an ally behind closed doors. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done there as well with Generation Z. Morgan,
Thank you so much, Brian.
Yeah, no problem.
That was great. Our next question is going to be for Keisha. Since you are our resident hospitality member of this panel, we'd like to ask you, do you think that the Black Lives Matter movement will have or is having an impact on the hospitality and tourism industry?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Allie. And, right away, like our industry is about people. So absolutely, this, the Black Lives Matter movement will have an effect, but I think a really good effect. And really echoing like what Brian just spoke on, and then our previous panelists as well, like representation really matters. But also just the lack of it. I think we're now seeing the effects of how it can just really perpetuate further stereotypes when you don't see it. And people start believing these narratives. And like I highlighted, I handle special events in the sports sector, but I came from hotels. I worked in hotels for about 10 years planning events. And one of the like most prominent like ideas or stigmas that was hard to get over is even like Black people belonging in luxury spaces, things like that, like always trying to. And so with that, you think, you know, representation matters, but it also starts with, you know, your board of directors, your stakeholders, who's in charge of the marketing campaigns, you know, who are we seeing traveling in these commercials? And so with that, I think having those effects, now we can really, as an organization, especially when it comes to tourism and hospitality, first, what I've really enjoyed doing across all sectors, whether that's associations or sporting venues, concerts, whatever it may be, we're all taking audit of who we are. Like what's happening today? What are we doing well? What aren't we doing? And then what's the goal? You know, what type of brand, what do we want to be known for? And what I will say is in creating a goal for diversity and inclusion, especially across associations and your different venues, I've really seen some boldness where it's okay with not having the answers and saying, okay, we don't see what we want to implement. So let's be bold enough to be the map. You know, let's be bold enough to create a model with where we'd like to take this. And so with that, it's creating great dialogue. And I think it's also empowering us as professionals to go a little deeper in fostering experiences. And if anyone is like me, like I can't wait to get back to a concert or like go to a game or a happy hour, an event in person. Like it's just been such a siloed time for a lot of us. And even though our industry has been really, really crippled by especially COVID-19, but then also it's allowed us to really kind of create these, I would say create these environments that really have these, we have the time to have the conversations where I would say a year ago, everybody was in the rat race and it was hard to really focus on, okay, how can we really take space and create these collectives to really work toward accountable change. And so once again, our connections, our relationships, the events, the more people can see themselves in what we're curating, it creates more visceral effects where people can connect to that event. So making things more inclusive with our campaigns, not only to just represent diversity, but truly honor it in a way that people feel is respectable. And so it represents our country, we're diverse. So it's time that that shows up in our work.
And Keisha, you definitely touched upon a point that we've been kind of preaching: representation matters, and to see yourself means something. And I too, as well as everyone else, I'm sure, feel the same way, where we do miss our concerts and being out. Soon come, soon come. The next question we have for everyone is, earlier today on our panel with the industry leaders, we talked with a senior generation, or a more senior generation, I should say. What do you wish that older generations understood about the Black Lives Matter movement? And what would you tell them right now to better understand the millennial perspective of this? We'll kick it off with Ms. Morgan Malone.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the number one thing that comes to mind for me is about impact. And what I'm seeing a lot of companies do during this moment is respond with a statement or use their DEI crew to think a little bit more critically about how do we diversify our staff, or do we promote enough people? Do we have enough diverse partners? Do we have enough diverse contracts? And that's important, and that's a step. And at the same time, there's really something to be said for cultural and intellectual reconciliation and restitution. So separate from just this larger idea of what can we add to our company, there's really work to be done to think critically about the industry and the contributions that Black people and people of color, period, have done to create the industry, or to develop intellectual capital for the industry, or develop cultural capital for the industry. How is that honored? How is that compensated? What is the impact of that on those people and those creators and the people that you are servicing in your respective companies? And so I think that there's a larger conversation to be had separate from personnel that really dives deep into a person is coming into your company, a person of color is coming into your company, and they are carrying the weight of the history of everything that has happened in this industry. They are responsible for looking up who the titans who look like them are in this space, looking up the history of who people who look like them are in this space and what they've contributed. They're responsible for their day-to-day impact to make sure that more people who look like them are going to be allowed into the space. They're responsible for their day-to-day impact to make sure that people who look like them are receiving and being impacted positively by the space. They're then also responsible for the future of what people of color look like in that space, how they're included, how they're considered, how they're contributing, and what that looks like, and then how they're impacted. And so that's a lot of weight for a handful of people of color to shoulder in any company. And so when we're thinking about what does DEI look like, inclusion is not just personnel, inclusion is really thinking about the history of your space, how it has positively or negatively impacted people of color, what you can do in this moment to change your impact and ingrain thoughts around equity about how you do your work, how you consider attitudes and perspectives and how you define your work, and then what your plan is to positively impact people in the future. But culture, I mean, is so heavy in this industry, and intellectual property is so heavy in this industry that they're just not things that can be overlooked for the sake of personnel DEI initiatives. We really, really have to think about the way that people of color have contributed to the culture that allows for us to throw events that are popular in the first place.
Thank you, Morgan. That was very insightful. Next, we're gonna pass it to Brian. While Brian is getting his mic working, we'll have Jamal start.
Yeah, I want to approach this question this way. Morgan's answer was great. And I know the question tackled when you talked about previous generations. I want to tackle this. A big problem that companies have, as well as prior generations have, is that they don't understand that to listen, you can't fear what people are the message that people are trying to push during these movements. What's happening is a lot of folks in previous generations don't understand that every generation is different, okay? And with every generation being different, that means that every generation is going to fight differently. And what a lot of the previous generations do is they're scared of, like, oh, you know, the media is portraying them a certain way, or they want this, they want that, without trying to figure out how to bring folks to the table and actually listen to what's the message of today, okay? Today's message is a little bit different. I'm one who can tell you, as one of the lead activists during Rahm Emanuel, it's a little bit different today under Mayor Lightfoot. And back when I was, fighting the movement on the front lines, I was saying different things as far as reform, right? This generation of young people is talking about abolition, right? And so every generation is different, but we can't be scared. We got to try to figure out what's the future that organizers in these movements are trying to get us to see, right? What are they trying to get us to see? Once you can start to see that, you can start to look within and start to actually take the message and then bring in certain folks to actually help you move down a more progressive path. I think that, a lot of the problems in the past as well, or previous generations, with being fearful of organizers and movements, is that they don't connect well with the folks on the ground. They don't look to bring organizers to sit on a board, right? And when you look at a lot of boards for companies and organizations, they don't have people that are actually connected to the folks, those grassroots folks. So what happens is they always got to ask a whole bunch of questions, call a lot of people, and figure out how to do certain things, because they're not connecting and bringing in the right people. You got to hire and spend money on a community engagement consultant, which is what my company does. But you got to do that because you can't understand what folks on the ground, what those grassroots folks are actually fighting for and how you can be a better partner to help move forward their message. And so that's what I'll say to that question.
Thank you, Jamal. And now we'll bring in Brian.
Yeah, that was actually the universe shifting their answer around, because I'm going to jump in there with Jamal a little bit and modify what I was going to say. I love the idea that the message is different today. If I could, I just mentioned that the first thing to know is that we are not our ancestors. And by that, I mean, you know, when I was growing up, my parents were at that point first generation college students, and I grew up in a household where the message was very clear. You get the job, you commit to the job, you go to the job, you do what your bosses say, you stay the course, and, you know, maybe at some point in time, things will work out in your favor. If you all read Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, he talks about this as like this assimilation, this mindset. And what's happening now is that millennials are starting to realize, my mom would say, the smarter we get, the more trouble we make. And I think that's very true. We're starting to realize that we actually don't have to stay that course, that we have the power. In fact, we have the responsibility to agitate the systems that we've been taught that are the standard. They don't have to be the standard. In fact, they probably should not be the standard. And so I think the thing you should realize about the millennial generation is we are starting to interrupt a cycle that we firmly believe should not exist. And what you're feeling, what you're seeing, what you're experiencing is the uprising of that indeed.
Thank you. Thank you. And next and final, we'll have Keisha share her perspective.
Yeah, definitely like echoing everyone in answering this question. Just especially with the millennial perspective, we're just in a place we've never been before. But something I would really like to share, especially with older generations and understanding like where we're at, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement is, and me personally, this is a conviction where I feel like even if you do nothing, a lot of people feel as though, okay, this isn't my fight. And so with that, I think there is a intolerance of that, because doing nothing leads to further desensitization, desensitization. And when I say that, it's like what you feel you can't connect to, you dismiss, and what you dismiss, you'll allow. And so with that, by us looking away and not attacking these issues head on and having direct conversations, the allowance is what the issue is. And that's where systemic issues continue to thrive and prevail. And so with that, I think with the Black Lives Matter movement, even as we have these conversations, especially in the workplaces, I think it's always such a macro perspective, large scale, pull up a, bullhorn, be on the front lines, let's all protest, and all of that is needed, especially the activism. We need people in the trenches that are close to the fight and understand where the needs. But also, I feel from that macro perspective, if this is something that you aren't personally convicted about, or you don't have, your own, if you don't subscribe to a diverse interactions within your personal life, it's going to be really hard for you to implement this on a macro level. It's going to be hard for you to join a D&I inclusion, equity effort within your company if you're afraid to talk to someone from a different background. So something that I would say, especially to older generations, is definitely just start micro, and don't be afraid to have dialogue around what's happening and how we can make it better collectively. Like Jamal was saying, don't be afraid to ask, activists, what's going on? Like, what are the issues? Like, where can I be effective within my community, So it's not all about the big macro and posting up a black square on Instagram. I think a lot of it starts very micro with your personal life.
Thank you to all of you for sharing. That was definitely great insight, I think, to feed back to senior leaders and people that are listening. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And I know everyone who's still on the call, we're running a few minutes late, but we've just got a couple of questions left for our panel. So I hope that you'll stick around with us to hear more of their amazing answers. So Next, we're going to take it over to Morgan Malone. And Morgan, what can industry leaders do to support and encourage activism within their employees?
I think everything starts with self. So don't ever be so confident that it's not you. Like the first things first is to support activism within your employees. You have to create a culture where they feel safe to engage with that activism for you. So while you may not be conscious of anything overt that you could have done or would have done, it's probably important to poll your employees and find out if it's possibly also you. And then from there, just thinking critically about areas that your industry and your organization has influence. Where do you have influence and who do you have influence among, and how can you use that to start thinking more critically about that cultural and intellectual reconciliation and amplifying more voices of those most marginalized?
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, Morgan. And for our next question, we will post it to Jamal. You've led several different community protests, as you mentioned, all over the city of Chicago. With your experience, what do you feel is still missing in order to move the needle forward?
Well, what's missing is there's not enough partners in the corporate world, to really help move this needle. What I mean by that is there are many fights that need to be fought, and what happens is corporations, they don't want to change within or help these fights unless they're forced to, or unless they're or it just makes sense for them. And at the end of the day, I saw that with Chase Bank, right? You had corporations that were literally funded by Chase. I had a few like DHS who came out and supported my effort. But there were many corporations or organizations that were scared, like, oh, I'm going to lose my funding from Chase. We got to stop, living in this world where we're all being controlled by somebody, so we're scared to voice what is right, and we all have to start taking risks. And so those corporations, even when you're talking about how principals, right? We got a principal in Brian here, and one of my close fighters works for him, and the principals come together as an association and they fight and say, we need this, right? There needs to be corporations to start to really come together to say, how can we help fund this? How can we help use our bully pulpit with the mayor, with these politicians? They're funding these campaigns. So why does it take for a regular citizen like me, I'm not elected or own a bank, to be able to start this fight when they know that this fight needs to happen? So let's come together and utilize the fact that we funded this politician and bring them to the table and say, hey, here, these are all our corporations and this needs to change, and we'll help you in this process. So we need partnership with everybody in every sector to start actually playing their role. It can't just be those folks on the ground. Everybody else must play a part. Thank you.
Thank you definitely to you for sharing that what's needed. I think it's definitely important for everyone to hear. I think we're at time, so we're gonna have to cut a question out. Allie? We're at time.
Yeah, I think we can end it here. We want to be mindful of everyone's time, but we will touch on, we were going to talk a little bit more about allyship. So we'll just say, Jackie posted in the chat, if everyone's watching, we have just published a resources page on the GMC website that's filled with things to watch, things to read, articles that have been posted, our previous webinars, all sorts of things that you can, if you have any recommendations on things that you have read or watched or heard throughout the past few months that you think would be beneficial to other members, please let us know, and we'll be happy to include them on the resources page. So thank you once again to our incredible panelists. If anyone has any questions for them, feel free to shoot us an email, send it into the chat, but we won't make you hang out all day to answer questions. But if you've got or Jackie, Rachel, Yolanda, one of us will get the question to the proper person.
And I do want to thank you to the IDE task force, as well as PCMA and Rachel, for giving us this platform. Of course, the panelists were amazing. I hope everyone was able to get great insight out of part 1 and part 2 as gems were shared. But thank you all for just allowing this to happen. We're so appreciative. Have a great day, everybody.
And then Rachel, if you want to jump in.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Ellie Morgan, the IDE task force. Wow, just blown away. Can't thank you enough. There was a line in there, people will never forget how you made them feel. And today you made a lot of us feel differently, activated and motivated to do something to make this a difference here. So thank you to the panelists. Wow, you guys are amazing. Hats off to you. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. GMC, we are taking on this issue head on, and we need to make some changes because we all need to see a better environment for all people. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a great day, everybody, and just have a wonderful Thanksgiving, regardless of the environment where you're having a Thanksgiving dinner might be a bit different, but count your blessings and Thanksgiving. Take care. Have a great day.
Thank you.